Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today to our webinar, How to Enter the Chinese Market, Different Channels and Approaches. I'm Davide Orlandi, EU Partnership Coordinator for EU SME Center, and I will be guiding you throughout today's webinar. First of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt thank you to you, the participants, as well as to the organizers, alongside EU SME Center, the EU China Business Association, and the Italy-China Council Foundation. So without further ado, let's take a look at the agenda. Today, we will be focusing on an introduction of the Chinese market, what are the channels available for entering this market, and which are the pros and cons of each of these channels, so that when considering entrance to the Chinese market, each European small and medium enterprise can pick the correct venue to showcase its product. Today, after my short speech, we will have an introduction from Gwenn Sonck from the EU China Business Association, EUCBA. And afterwards, our main speaker, Alessio Petino from EU SME Center, will cover the topic of entering the Chinese market, as mentioned before. At the end of the webinar, we will also have a Q&A session. So please do not hesitate to ask any questions you might have by using the function on the Zoom platform, so do not hesitate to write them. We will try to reply to all of the questions during the webinar today, but should we not have enough time, we will make sure to get back to you by email privately after the event. Before moving on with the presentation, I would like to spend a quick couple of words on EU SME Center. This is an EU-funded project funded by the European Commission under the Single Market Programme. Its overall goal is that of supporting European small and medium enterprises that want to enter or expand in the Chinese market. This project has been launched in 2010. This is currently the 13th year of its life. And for this fourth phase of the project, we have 6 partners, 4 consortium partners and 2 associated partners that you can see at the bottom of this slide. As I mentioned, the goal is that of supporting European small and medium enterprises that want to engage with the Chinese market. To do so, there are 5 core services that are offered free of charge to all EU-based small and medium enterprises, as well as single market program participating countries based small and medium enterprises. The 5 services are complementary, let's say, one leads to the other. The first one that I would like to mention is the self-diagnosis tool. This is directly accessible to all EU SMEs directly on the EU SME Center website. This tool allows for the enterprise to assess their readiness towards the Chinese market. Should any knowledge gap emerge while taking this quiz, the website will directly prompt and redirect to the knowledge component of EU SME Center services. Under this component, it can be perceived, let's say, as a database of all the market reports, guidelines, case studies that have been produced in the past 13 years by EU SME Center, and of course kept up to date. And they can serve as a bridge, let's say, to close those gaps that might have emerged during the self-diagnosis tool. Under this component, we find a various degree of information. We can start from very general introduction to the Chinese market, so how to engage with the market, how to engage with partners, up until to very detailed and specific information on sectoral kind of issues. The third component is the advice and ask the expert one. Here, SMEs can directly pose questions to our experts. So whilst the general knowledge can be provided under the knowledge component, here the enterprise can ask questions that are relevant for the enterprise per se. So very specific, very detailed and tailored kind of questions. And of course, this serves as a gateway to receive more relevant, if we might, information from the enterprise, so that it can be directly applicable by the enterprise. The third component is the training one. Under this component, we organize events such as the one we're attending today, or conferences, in-person training. This as well can be tailored to the needs of the entity we are interacting with. And it is fundamental because it provides information once again, on a very different degree of activities, of topics. Also here, we can range from broad kind of dissemination activities to very detailed and targeted sessions on specific issues for each sector and each market. The last service that is offered is the advocacy one, and this one focuses on providing a venue for European enterprises that are mostly already active in the Chinese market to make sure that their voice is heard at the governmental level in China. So without further ado, I would like to once again thank you all of you for participating today, and I would like to leave the floor to Gwenn Sonck. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Davide. So ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the EU-China Business Association, we also warmly welcome you to this webinar organized jointly with the EU SMEs Center in Beijing and the Italy-China Council Foundation. Today's webinar is focusing on how to enter the Chinese market and what are the different challenges and approaches. I'm just back from a 3-week business trip from China, and after 3 years, it really felt good to be back. Old and new partners were all very welcoming. You feel China's economy is reopening and life is actually as good as back to normal, and there are no COVID restrictions at all anymore. As you all know, when you do business with China, the personal contact with your business partner is very important. You need to build up the relationship. You also need to feel the dynamism and the vibe of the Chinese market on the ground and how China is evolving. So I strongly advise business leaders to go and visit China again. During my visit, I joined already 2 opening ceremonies of members of our chambers, which were celebrating the establishment of their new factories, one in Suzhou Industrial Park, focused on the medtech sector, and the other factory focusing on the aquaculture in Hainan province, where also the EU SME Center is taking part today in the opening of the Consumer Expo. Also, President Macron just returned from China with 55 business leaders signing trade and investment deals. Our member companies also continue to invest in China. In short, China remains a market which cannot be ignored. But it is, of course, important to do your homework and to prepare yourself well before you go. In that regard, I would like just to mention a practical tip. So this is not a strategic point before you go, because we receive this question every day. And this is to download the app Alipay, which is a payment and booking app that you can connect to your foreign bank card, so you can make payments for taxis, trains, plane tickets, and also book it with this app. So up to now, foreigners with no local bank card cannot pay with WeChat, but of course, China changes quickly, so maybe when you go, this will be solved. This is something we do not know when that will be solved. So this was just a practical note, as not everyone has someone at his side all the time when you are in China. So together with the EU SME Center, we organized several interesting webinars, such as getting to know your Chinese partner. This gives you a good insight on which information you can find online about your potential business partner. I also like to stress that having a good IP strategy in your overall China strategy is very important. Also on this issue, the EU SME IPR China Help Desk in Beijing and Brussels assist European SMEs free of charge. As mentioned, China's economy is reopening. The growth rate for the Chinese economy for this year aims at 5% compared to 3% last year. The opening up will certainly increase trade and investment between both sides. In 2022, EU-China trade has increased by 20% compared to 2021. And this acceleration has been driven mainly by China's exports to the EU, which is in part thanks to the sharp increase in demand for Chinese-made goods during the pandemic. In 2022, China was the 3rd largest trading partner for European exports of goods. This was preceded by the United States and United Kingdom. China was the largest partner for EU imports of goods in 2022. China remains an important market for our companies, and most of our member companies are in China, for China, and for the long term. But let me end by saying a few words about the EU-China Business Association. The EUCBA is the Association of Bilateral China Business Associations in the EU, aiming to promote the economic and trade relations between China and the EU. Today, we have 20 member companies representing more than 20,000 European and Chinese companies, and our aim is to be complementary to the national level. We receive high-level Chinese delegations, organize EU-China business matching meetings, high-level conferences and meetings with European Chinese authorities, such as lately with the European Trade Commissioner Dombrovskis, Chinese Ambassador Fu Song, and so on. The EUCBA is also an official associated partner of the EU SME Center in China. I would like to end here and give the floor to Mr. Alessio Petino, who is the business advisor of the EU SME Center in Beijing. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen, for the introduction and for inviting me today to join this webinar. Maybe a few words about myself. I am currently based in Europe. I was based in China until a few months ago, right before the end of the restrictions. I am currently contributing to the activities of the USME Center. I am mostly in charge of dealing with the inquiries that we receive from companies. As my colleague Davide mentioned, we have this Ask the Expert, we have this self-diagnosis tool, these advisory tools that companies can use. And if there are any questions, if there are any doubts or comments, I am the one coordinating such responses. So today the topic is different channels and approaches to enter or at least approach the Chinese market. Is a very general topic, which of course needs to be adapted, let's say, to the specific needs, characteristics, resources of each companies. It will be very general, but I will do my best to provide concrete examples on each of the aspects of the things I'm going to mention, so to give you a real idea of what does it mean in practice. And again, as director Gwen mentioned, it's very important to be on the ground, and if you have the opportunity, I think it's a wise decision. So specifically, I am going to focus on three parts. The first part is a bit of background to share with you what we as EU SME Center have seen and continue to see from European companies. Then I will focus on the core part of this webinar, which is introducing different ways and channels to approach the Chinese market. And then we have a concluding slide about some of the most important challenges that European companies will face. Yeah, to start, we all know that January 2023 was the date where the time where China finally ended all the restrictions. But actually, even before that time, during the 3 years since the beginning of the pandemic, we continue to see a very strong interest and appetite of European companies in the Chinese market. Reasons, of course, many reasons, but some of the most common ones are that China is a huge market, of course, and there is a vast middle class, and they're spending more. They're upgrading consumption, especially in big cities. There is more awareness of quality rather than quantity, and this, of course, is an advantage for foreign products. China has an amazing world-class infrastructure network. So if you have some production facilities there, from a supply chain perspective, China is very, very strong. China's been opening up, of course, with the exception of the travel restrictions during those 3 years. Some sectors, restrictions on some sectors have been gradually relaxed. And then, of course, there are many opportunities to even if you were unable to travel physically to China, still you could manage to enter the market via internet, via digital technologies, e-commerce, and there are also some nice innovations and emerging products, market segments in China, which we don't find here in Europe. And this was before the end of the restrictions. So once the restrictions were removed, we see that, of course, there is this appetite, this interest, there is even more, and there is this eagerness to go back to China as soon as possible, to reconnect with partners, to try to be there as soon as possible, like a gold rush, to be on the ground. And we see that business trips to China are resuming. Actually, as USME Center some of my colleagues are in these days in Hainan for the one of the big expos happening there, and there are many companies traveling there from Europe to explore some opportunities. We also see that there are some delegations of Chinese businesses and government representatives traveling to Europe to reconnect with partners there for in-person meetings. Yeah, I mentioned trade fairs. Now there were a lot of these events were canceled during the past 3 years, but now they are being rescheduled, they're being confirmed, and are taking place again finally. And there have also been some measures, some documents in the past couple of months from the Chinese administration to outlining some measures to attract foreign direct investment or to attract key experts, engineers to go to the country. So this is a bit the situation before and after. So to summarize, there is a lot of interest. Now there is even more, and there's some degree of optimism despite all the, let's say, the broader narrative of what is happening between you know, at the political level. The problem is that you know, Chinese market is a very challenging one, and actually when companies get on the ground, they might face some challenges that they did not expect, or they expect to a lower degree. And these challenges, of course, is that maybe preparation, but also the investment prepared, secure for entering the Chinese market maybe is not enough, or the knowledge of the Chinese market, how it marks the dynamics of the Chinese market is not enough. Working with the wrong partners. I will mention later one of the channels to enter the market, but if you get stuck in a relation with some local partners that doesn't work well, then it's going to be very difficult to get out of this relation. Cultural factors, and of course, you know, the intercultural communication, the interpersonal skills, but not only this, also cultural factors within the enterprise, maybe the headquarters in Europe or in any other countries, and the local team or company in China. There could be different, let's say, practices, cultural factors that might not play well for the company. There is a different role of the government in China in the business, and this is not necessarily for bad proposals. It's also for good reasons, for good proposals. If you contribute to the local economy, if you bring something, if you are a valuable company, many local administrations, believe me, will be very ready and keen to support you, to help you, maybe accessing some incentives or connect you with some potential partners, clients. And it's much more than what we are used to see here in Europe. Another challenge is that you know, there is still the impression after I come back here to Europe, I still see the, you know, this perception that China is cheap and you know, costs are very low, but actually it's not the case. China is very expensive. Renting office space or even manufacturing space, paying salaries are very high in China, especially for engineers. There is, of course, local competition. This has been there since a while, but also nationalism, which for consumer products maybe is an impact factor. Unwritten barriers. In China, what you see written on the rules, on the laws, is not necessarily what happens in practice, and this might be a challenge for many not used to working in this way, and many other factors. So as Gwen mentioned, you have to do your homework, so you need to be prepared for that, and you have to have a lot of resources, and you have to be committed and have a long-term view. You don't make money in a short period of time. You have to give, and then you can take something. So now, entering this core part of the webinar, there are different ways to approach the Chinese market, and there is no right or wrong. There is no best way. It all depends on your needs, your expectations, your resources, but also how much you want to commit to the Chinese market. If China is your only market in Asia, or if you're already working with 100+ countries, also your exposure, your tolerance of risk. Depending on this factor, there are many ways to approach the market. let's say the most common, the most traditional one is just to export products without being physically, legally present with a legal entity in China. So using distributors, importers. You can also invest in China. You can establish your company there, and even in this case, there are different types of companies, of entities that could be established. Another way, which I will explain later, but there's a nice way to work with China is to do some project-based cooperation on R&D. If you have some software or other technology, ICT products, maybe you can also license your products, your technology, and as a way to enter the market. And then last, there is also the possibility to, you know, to work with a Chinese investor, invest in your company in Europe. I will go in detail into each of these. Sorry, something happened here. Everything is right. I will go in detail into each of these ways in the next slides. But what I would like to stress is that, again, in addition to not having a right or wrong, you can pursue different ways at the same time, simultaneously. One doesn't necessarily exclude the other. So in practice, this is what happens. Maybe you start with one way, then simultaneously you prepare for another way, and then pursue both together, or maybe abandoning one after. So there needs to be some flexibility. The traditional way, the first way, is again to export via importers, distributors, and I would like to say that there are two ways to do so. The first one is the called general trade, which you can, is the most common way, is a traditional one. You can sell both offline and online. You can export as much as you want. There are no limits in terms of volume that you can export, as long as, of course, you have clients willing to buy your products. And then you can target any regions, basically, with or without giving exclusive, let's say, exclusivity to partners. There are some cons of this approach, which is, as I mentioned before, if you give exclusivity to one local importer, if this importer doesn't perform very well, if doesn't reach the targets agreed, then maybe it will not be easy to end this relationship. Or also, if if you work with distributors, agents, maybe you don't know what will happen specifically to your brand, to your products. Maybe what kind of communication campaigns will be done to increase sales. Maybe these campaigns are not necessarily in line with your brand culture. So without being on the ground, might be difficult to monitor this. Sometimes, to be able to introduce a product in Chinese market in this way, you might need to go through very long and costly testing, inspection, certification procedures that could be very long. If you export medical devices, depending on the category of the medical device, but it could take even 2 years or even more. For cosmetics, could be as short as 6 months to 1 year. Meat products could be way longer than 1 year. So you have to take into account this. And sometimes you can even export some products, because some product categories, especially food and beverage, might need a government agreement between China and your country in order to be able to export. So there is another way, actually, before maybe you prepare all this paperwork, maybe while you wait the certification, maybe you can still use this export way to export, but in a different way, called cross-border e-commerce. So basically, is exporting, selling products exclusively online on certain platforms. You don't sell offline, you cannot sell offline, and you just need to open maybe a store on a certain platform, or to have your products sold by somebody who has a store there. And this is much faster, because you don't need to comply with many of the regulations and the standards required by Chinese regulations. You can ship a product as soon as an order is made online, or you can also ship them in advance and store them in a warehouse in a bonded zone. And it's very useful. This is a very useful way, because you can start selling very quickly and getting some feedback on your products from Chinese consumers, while preparing all the paperwork required for general trade. The cons is that not all products can be sold in this way. There is a catalog, a positive list, and only products on that list can be sold in this way. Most of consumer goods are. It is not cheap. Many people believe that this is a cheap way to enter the Chinese market. It is, meaning that opening a store doesn't cost that much, but actually driving traffic to your store, doing marketing is very, very, very expensive. And it's not flexible because you must use only certain cross-border e-commerce platforms, and yes, you cannot export. There are some limits in terms of volume. So this was the first way, let's say traditional export. The second way would be to open your entity in China. So you can do so in different ways. And for different reasons. There is a representative office, which is the easiest and say the cheapest one, and you don't need a lot of investment to do so. And you can do so basically to develop, to find new clients, to develop networks, but you cannot do many other things. You cannot generate revenue. You cannot sell. You cannot issue invoice, you cannot produce, you cannot do many other things, but you can but of course this allows you eventually to, if something happens, to basically shut down operations very easily and very quickly. And it's ideal for people who are just now starting to develop in Chinese business networks and want to be on the ground while still maybe exporting from Europe via agents and importers, so to the previous way that I mentioned before. Then you can also establish your entity, commercial entity. Could be a joint venture with a local partners, or could be a WFOE, a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. And in this case, of course, costs are higher, the approval times are longer, not as long as it used to be in the past, but still not as quick as the representative office. The benefit is that, of course, in this way, you can do whatever you want, of course, within the scope of laws. You can issue invoices, you can make revenue, you can produce, you can manufacture products. But there are, of course, higher risks and more difficult exit strategies, let's say, because to liquidate company is very difficult. But it's good maybe if you already know that your product has potential in the Chinese market and you want to scale up, let's say, your operations, you can consider these ways. And maybe one comment is that for some sectors, joint venture might be mandatory. So for some sectors, for investment restricted, you might be forced to enter into a joint venture. Well, not you might be forced, but you have to enter a joint venture if you want to access the market. Otherwise, you will not be allowed to enter the market. And the last, which is less common, but there are many incubators in China, also some in partnership with foreign incubators, or even some programs from EU member states that partner up with Chinese incubators to offer some soft lending programs for startups. And this is pretty cheap, and you can actually get a whole set of services for very low prices: mentorship, company registration, matchmaking with investors and clients. And it's actually a very interesting way for micro, let's say, enterprises, or for entrepreneurs with more resources. And there are actually cases of Europeans doing so. Another way, which is the one I really like this way, and R&D, project-based R&D cooperation. Now, when maybe you hear the word R&D, maybe it's still a bit sensitive, but R&D actually in China could mean many things. It's not just, could also be just testing the feasibility of a product, a proof of concept, or demonstration project. This falls within the category, the definition of R&D, and you can do so it's still pretty uncommon, and I would say underestimated way to engage with the Chinese market, but I think it has a lot of potential. Actually, there are a lot of programs that support such ways. In Europe, we have the Horizon Europe, but also the member states level, you might have similar level. And there is a co-funding mechanism between the EU and China. So if you invite some Chinese partners to be official members of your Horizon Europe consortium, then The Chinese partner can also receive co-funding from the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology, and only in 2 areas: climate change and biodiversity, food, agriculture, and biotechnologies. If you see the work programs of Horizon Europe, everything is crystal clear written there. But also member states, individual member states have similar mechanisms. They have joint calls with the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology, and where basically each side funds companies or universities from their own side for doing a project together. And actually also the local level, the Chinese local level, you have similar things. You have the Science and Technology Administration in Shanghai or Jiangsu, Zhejiang province, Guangdong, of course, that have similar mechanisms. They have they are called international cooperation programs, where foreign companies can actually join a Chinese company to do some R&D project, and the Chinese side will receive actually funding for that. So why and actually some of these local level programs in China, that sometimes they also target specific countries, and among these, Finland, I have to say, is the pioneer in these programs, especially for SMEs. So why I insist that this is a very interesting way, because you don't have to commit too much besides the scope of the project. Once the project ended, you don't have any obligation to do anything, and you can and it's good because if it works well, you can actually continue to work with this Chinese partner. You can scale up these relations and maybe do something more concrete in China, maybe do a demonstration project in China, try to find some Chinese clients. And there is evidence of European SMEs doing so, starting from a Horizon Europe project, then partnership went well, and then they evolve, they do something bigger. Of course, you have to be a bit careful about IPR ownership, how you intend to own and exploit achievements from the research. Have to be a bit careful on this. And the other thing is that if you're not on the ground, maybe it might be difficult to find Chinese partners willing to engage in such cooperation. But there are. And I think this is a very interesting way to enter the Chinese market. Second last, you can license your products, your technology, and it's not only big companies that do so, but many SMEs do so. I'm thinking about industrial software. There are many cases of even micro European companies licensing their technology to China, and it's cost effective. You get a stable source of income. In this way, maybe you can you have more time resources to focus on your core activities, and actually your Chinese partner in this, your Chinese licensee will also actually gain some subsidies, which you can leverage when negotiating the contract. There are some cons, which of course the royalties, there are corporate income tax to be paid by you actually. Well, it will be paid by your partner on a withholding basis, but it will be deducted from your revenue. And there are some significant constraints in terms of how you want to, if there are some cross-border data or personal information transfers, might not be that easy to do so, might not be that complicated to do so either. There are some misperceptions about this, but I have to be a bit careful on this. And also maybe as it was the case for the traditional export way, where you might have difficulties in controlling your product, here you might have the same. So you don't know what will happen to your product, what the Chinese licensee will do to your product once they get the license to use it. There's also another thing which is subcontracting on research, but maybe this is a bit more advanced and maybe applicable only to life sciences pharma companies. We are seeing actually cases that companies want to leverage on China's pool of scientists, engineers, and maybe they outsource some clinical studies to China, and so on. If you want to know more about this, maybe we can discuss later. This way actually has significant challenges on IP, and as it was mentioned before, there is one project funded by the EU called China IP SME Help Desk, which provides free assistance to European SMEs on IP related issues in China, also in other countries, by the way. And And last, I put this as last because you know, it's still a bit sensitive. You can also actually have a Chinese company or investor investing in your company in Europe. Chinese investment in Europe has been ongoing, even though in the past few years has slowed down significantly. And of course, we all know, we all read rising concerns, you know, increasingly sensitive nature of this topic, investment screening rules at both the EU level, but also member states level. And something very interesting that we're seeing is also reputational issues. Now, I think if sometimes, unfortunately, if a European company receives Chinese investment or invest in China, sometimes they receive some backlash from media and things, and these are all big problems that affect business. But I don't think but actually receiving Chinese investment in your company is not necessarily a bad thing, because of course it gives you more capital, but actually in this way you can also gain access to the Chinese market. So the Chinese investor will actually bring your products and technology to the Chinese market, so you gain a new market. And actually, if you know, the Chinese investor might also bring new know-how, new technologies that can actually improve your existing products. The cons, of course, in addition to the few aspects that I mentioned before, is that you know, there might be risk of depending how the investment is structured and negotiated, you might lose let's say authority within your company. There might be a company restructuring where the board of your company might be the majority of the board might be owned by the Chinese side, and then maybe you risk losing your company, and on the long term maybe ending in bankruptcy. There are cases, actually, this is not a theory, but there are real cases of European companies being invested by Chinese companies and actually disappearing, you know. And then, of course, the IP thing, transfer of know-how to EU in China, but it's managed. It could be manageable, could be a way. And actually, I personally think that this could make sense if you know, in three ways, for three conditions. So if the Chinese investor brings not only new capital but also new technology, or brings new clients access to the Chinese market, so you actually gain something. It's not just the Chinese side gaining from you, but you actually gain from the Chinese investor. If it's a greenfield investment rather than an acquisition or a merger of your company. And then if the investment doesn't lead to loss of control of the governance of the company, then maybe I think it actually could make sense to explore this way. Yeah, I still have a few minutes. Maybe one. Yeah, actually, there could be also other forms of engagement. I'm thinking about procurement. If you operate in certain sectors, you can also work on try to work to prepare some bids to Chinese procurement, to Chinese standards. Of course, it's very difficult, and if we want, we can discuss in more detail about some policies, some problems in the pharmaceutical and medical devices sector, which but for other sectors it could be a way. But if you can think about other approaches as well, please, I would very appreciate if you could. I would very much like to hear your thoughts in the chat or the Q&A. So I have one last slide, which is about the challenges and the barriers that you might face in China or when working with China, regardless of which specific way you choose to enter the market. The first one, the more general one, I think it's the increasing politicization of business. So basically, we mentioned before different role of the government in the business, and it could be, and there is evidence if you follow media, it could be that you know, maybe some certifications, some permits, some agreements to allow you to sell a product might be suspended, might be delayed, might be there might be extra requirements if maybe the relationships at the political level between your country and China get worse. there could be a lot of intervention by authorities to maybe impact your business relations, even if you didn't do anything, but even if you don't have any fault, but it's just because the political level things are getting worse. This is a risk, and it's always there. Unfortunately, China has a system which, let's say, has many gray areas, and this leaves room for intervention and impact on your business. Another issue, it was mentioned in my presentation, but also in the introductions, IP is extremely important. You have to be, you must have a strategy for IP even before approaching the Chinese market, not just when approaching the Chinese market. Even before considering it, you should already protect your IP in China. China has improved significantly in protecting IP, especially for patents and trademarks. For trade secrets is still a bit needs to be improved, but overall the system is improving, but maybe the enforcement is still not as effective as it could be in other countries. And some sectors, maybe the compensations that you get if your IP is infringed are still pretty low, but overall it's improving. And for patents and trademark, at least, you can actually get a pretty effective protection in China. Standards and compliance, actually, Chinese standards are not, in most cases, are aligned with international standards, but there are some cases in which they are not. So they're very localized, meaning that you might have to meet different requirements than what's required in other countries. So you might need to adjust your product. You might need to do some testing based on different testing procedures. And this actually could cause delay and extra cost for you before you can sell your product in the Chinese market. But also labels might not be the same as well, of course they're in Chinese, but the type of information, the type of the structure of the label might be different from what you are used to in other countries. If you operate with an entity in China, you might have difficulties in accessing financing. Getting loans for foreign companies from Chinese banks is very difficult. There are extra requirements for you, and also if you get loans in foreign currency, there are some caps, some limits that you can get. You cannot get as much as you want, but there is a limit depending on your registered capital and how much you paid of that capital. I mentioned before, China especially in the last 2 years, has issued a lot of regulations and rules for regulating data and personal information collection and transfer. For SMEs, actually, the impact is not as big as it is for bigger companies or for companies in certain sectors like life sciences. Actually, you just in the majority of cases, if you don't operate in sensitive sectors, you might just need to use some standard contract clauses from Chinese standard contract clauses, and then you're pretty much okay. But in any case, you have to follow certain rules which are different, even though aligned, but still different from GDPR, for instance. Movement of materials. Actually, if you work, for instance, in life sciences, in pharmaceuticals, if you need to move some biological samples from one country to the other, or if you operate in any sector, but you want to bring used equipment, used instruments, or even prototypes from your own country to China, it might be difficult to do so. There are a lot of requirements, and there is no clear regulation to do that. So if you moving things in and out of China, it's not very straightforward. And then, of course, human resources. Mobility, I would say, is not anymore an issue because now you can travel freely. But human resources is also an issue. SMEs usually, especially newcomers, don't have a strong, let's say, brand in the eyes of Chinese people. So they might not be that you might not be that attractive as employer for Chinese skilled talents to work for, or maybe or even to retain the talent for long term. It's a big issue, actually. And this is an issue also for multinational companies, actually, to attract and retain talent, Chinese talent. So it's even more problematic for small companies. I would end my presentation here because again, it's pretty generic. If you have any questions, you can of course submit in the chat. I see a few questions already, but also in the next days or months, if you would like to ask any questions to us or discuss about some potential approaches that you're considering, reach out to us. Again, we would be very happy to have a chat with you absolutely for free, or maybe to have one of our external experts providing you some advice, and this is completely free for you. So let us know. You can also write to me, and I would end it here. I look forward to go to some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessio. I see we have a lot of questions piling up. Before taking a couple of them, I would like to, first of all, ask you to, I see we have a couple of raised hands. If possible, I would like to ask you to please write down the question in the Q&A session under the Zoom platforms, that should we not be able to reply during this webinar, we might do so at a later time through email. Especially also another point that I would like to raise, for those of you that have registered as anonymous attendees, we might not be able to reach out to you since we might not have your email address. So please do reach out to us by email in case we do not answer your question today. So without further ado, I think we can start by picking up some of these questions. Yes. It's extremely positive to see all this engagement that has been prompted by this presentation. So I'm extremely glad to see that.
Yes, maybe I can just pick a few of them that I'm reading now.
Yes, please, Alessio.
So I see one question on withholding taxes. Withholding taxes is basically a tax that non-resident enterprises in China have to pay for China-sourced income. So basically, you are a company based in Belgium, you don't have a legal entity in China, but you get money from China, you get revenue from China. Your Chinese client will need to pay the corporate income tax on your behalf, and also VAT, by the way. And I think the specific rate might depend on whether it's a royalty or it's just a business revenue. It might also depend if there is a bilateral tax agreement between China and your country. But in general, the rate is about 10% of the income, plus 6% plus surcharges plus 6% of VAT plus surcharges, which are usually 0.7%. So when you draft a contract, you have to take into account this. If you say you will receive 100, then maybe net you will receive less than 100. So make sure that this is well reflected in your contract. So this is one. Another question that I see is about the Greater Bay Area. So what are the opportunities in the Greater Bay Area, including Hong Kong, given the importance of the Greater Bay Area initiative? There are a lot, but not just there. I mean, as usual, Chinese local administrations, in order to attract foreign investment, they offer a lot. They offer a lot of incentives. They offer a lot of incentives. They offer a lot of sometimes even corporate income tax reduction. Maybe I'm thinking about Chengdu, Chongqing cluster. So there are many of such incentives. I don't know now specifically which incentives are there because I'm not a Greater Bay Area expert, but there are a lot. But I think what is maybe the strongest advantage, I think there's also tax reduction, by the way, but what I think is the greatest advantage of the Greater Bay Area is the role of Hong Kong that could play in this. Hong Kong is much, let's say, enjoys much more solid and transparent institutions, mechanisms for moving capital in out, and Hong Kong is going to be integrated into Guangdong in this initiative. So there will be a lot of customs facilitation, a lot of financial mechanisms to facilitate international transactions, and I think this is the biggest advantage. You don't have a similar mechanism in China. Then, of course, again, there will be certainly many incentives. Maybe I can also take a look at that in this afternoon or tomorrow. So if you're interested, you can reach out to me. I see many questions.
Yeah, I think, Alessio, we can also jointly answer the previous question as well as the one question that points to the if it would be best to directly set up a Chinese entity in China mainland or set up in Hong Kong first and then sell from Hong Kong.
Yeah, it depends. Again, there is no one size fits all solution. It depends. Hong Kong has certain advantages. For instance, if you have to again move a lot of capital in and out of Hong Kong for business reason, in Hong Kong you can do it very easily. In China, less so. There are a lot of restrictions on foreign currency exchange, or yes, just moving people and capital, I would say, but also how effective institutions are. If you have to you know, Hong Kong's legal system is let's say closer to our standards compared to China. But then if you want to sell to Chinese companies in mainland China, or if you have suppliers in mainland China, if you want to benefit from maybe lower costs or greater support from local administrations, then mainland China is a better option. So it really depends. But actually you can also have a company in Hong Kong only, actually. I also see many people asking about the presentation after the webinar. Yes, we will share the presentations, but also the recording of this webinar, I think, will be published on our website in the next few days. There is a question about salary benchmark. I don't have this data, but I know there are reports from these headhunting companies, HR companies, that the big ones that they do. But I would say from personal experience, again, take it very carefully because it's just my own personal experience. I would say that, you know, a very good, maybe 5 to 10 years work experience engineer, Chinese would cost, maybe I would say, maybe 50 to maybe around 50,000 yuan per month, which in euros would be 7,000 euro per month. Of course, it's a lot. I see your face, Davide. it's actually a lot, and plus you also have to give a lot of benefits in terms of 30 months, and now with the pandemic, you know, there is this work from home, this flexibility. These are things which are happening and are increasingly being requested, and it's very difficult to get good talents. So those that are very good talents, they want to be paid a lot. So I would say don't think and actually foreign engineers cost even more because you have to pay for the travel, for the house, for the tuition of the kids' school, and a lot. So, and it's very expensive. But even for let's say project managers and you know, consultants advising on businesses, I wouldn't look for less than, let's say, 4,000 or 5,000 euro per month for you know, 5 to 10 years work experience. But again, this is my personal what I hear, let's say, from friends, from partners, from but you can look for, if you're looking for more detailed data, there are a lot of reports on this.
And Alessio, I think there's also a big difference between the cities, like
Yes.
if you have an engineer, Beijing, Shanghai, or you have one in a second, third tier city. Of course, the rates will be different.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and this also lead to, you know, the question whether Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen are still the, let's say, the best areas where you can set up your company. And because traditionally, of course, they are. They have a lot of people, talented people, a lot of graduates, a lot of very advanced infrastructure, but they're not the only ones. There are many developing areas. I'm thinking about Chengdu, Chongqing, but also Wuhan, Hefei. There are areas which are much cheaper, and they offer a lot of opportunities, and maybe the local governments are even more keen to work with you because there are less foreign companies there, so they maybe might treat you better. If you are in Beijing, maybe, you know, unless you are a Fortune 500 company, or you open an big R&D center there, I don't think they even care about you. I think they, yeah, so but again, yeah, of course, a bigger city costs more. I see one question about if there are incentives for you know, for setting up. I lost the question, but if there are incentives for Europeans to set up a business in China, yes, there are a lot, and this, you know, it's the same everywhere. Also in Europe, if you invest in Europe, local governments will give you a lot of will give you different incentives, and the same is China. So you have to think that Chinese provinces and cities, they compete a lot against each other. It's not like they're all working together harmoniously. Maybe on political objective, yes, but on practical business aspects, they compete a lot. So in order to succeed in this competition, they offer some incentives, some subsidies, some rewards, and all of them offer similar incentives. Of course, different incentives may be provided by different, let's say the degree, the amount of incentives provided, or the type of incentive provided might differ, but all of them offer something, and some of them are very attractive. Maybe they for instance, Western regions, again, Chongqing, Sichuan, Chengdu, you pay 15% of corporate income tax if you invest in an encouraged sector instead of 25%, or they can pay, they exempt you from local components of taxes for some years, or they give you free office space, or they give you land, or they give you priority allocation of land, and they help you hiring people, hiring a lot of incentives, and it's really a lot. Actually, at the SME Center, we have a report on end of 2021, which summarize all these types of incentives that can be obtained. But we are still talking about some technology kind of companies. If you just sell maybe food and beverage product, you don't really get much because this is, you know, but if you produce maybe some electronics or some medical devices, machinery, you will get something. So production, not for or services, not just trading, let's say. I see another question on nationalism and how the local population perceive foreign brands. Yes, this is obviously happening, and of course the you know, the broader narrative, China against the West, or West trying to bully us, doesn't help, obviously, but yes, this is happening, and this is an issue. But I would also like to say that part of the reason is because local products are much better than the past. There are a lot of products which local products which are not at all inferior to European products. So of course, if Chinese people have the option to buy a local good product or a foreign same level product, they would buy the local one, which is even cheaper. I would say that, again, my own perception when I wasn't my time in China until 5 months ago, I think that the foreign products overall still have a pretty okay image. The European is still perceived to be high quality, but not as but it's not the only high quality product available. There are also local ones now, and again, this in high quality alone is not enough to sell the product. You also have to let people to tell people why your product is high quality, what is the story behind this product. So I would say that border products are still perceived okay. Of course, there are differences between sectors, but this alone is not enough for you to sell your products.
Yeah, I would like to quickly mention that we are running a little bit late, but given the degree of engagement of the audience and the amount of questions, I think we can try and pick up a couple more of them. So we will be, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes late, and then we will try and reply to all of the other ones.
Yes, I see a lot of questions
moment.
Involved some political aspects, Macron visit, or Taiwan or Middle East visits. I am not in the position to answer these questions. I focus on business practical aspects. We have an advocacy part in our SME Center where we discuss some of these issues, maybe the impact of certain political developments, we do so. But so you can follow our website, but I'm not responsible for this area. I'm not in the position to answer these questions.
Yeah, I find it interesting, on the other hand, the question on how to correctly find a Chinese importer. Of course, trade fair has been pointed out as a potential venue to find one of these entities. Can you please share some suggestions on how to find one possible importer? No, it would be maybe excessive to say the right importer, but just some very quick, let's say, tips and guidelines.
So how to find a Chinese importer?
Yeah.
This is the billion-dollar question. Well, of course, trade fairs now are resuming and people are attending. So, of course, this remains one of the ways available. I'm not sure how useful are those. I personally don't have a very positive view of trade fairs, but indeed, if you're lucky, there are many trade fairs you can go. I would say another interesting thing that not everybody knows is that European member states, embassies, chambers of commerce in China often have a list of importers, of Chinese importers, or have contacts. So maybe my first approach, if I was an European exporter, my first approach would be to reach out to my own chamber of commerce or embassy in China. Now, chamber of commerce might not offer this service for free. Some of them might ask for some fees, but you know, usually it's not. I don't think it's very high. So this would be the first thing to do. Then I would you know, still try to go to trade fairs, but even conferences, academic related conference. The academics in China are very important. I think one of the entry point, of course, depend on the sector, but if you have some technology products, actually academics, I in my personal experience, I find academics are very powerful because they're academics, but often they have consulting roles in companies, or they have part-time jobs in companies, they contribute to companies, or they have very strong ties with the local government. So I would also consider them. And then, yeah, go to events, network, or another thing that has worked with one company, at least we heard that it worked from another company. There was this company from Spain that was selling to products to other companies, in other markets, right? Not in China. They were interested in China. So what they did, they actually worked with one of their clients, not in China, and basically they got introduced by their subsidiary, by the affiliate of this client in China. And so they got contact, and you know, the headquarters say, hey, your products work very well, why don't you try the product in the Chinese subsidiaries? And actually this worked. So in this case, so maybe I would even explore that. Then, yeah.
I would say that maybe we can wrap it up here for the
sorry, one very last
session.
comment, because this is related.
Yes, please.
I think how one should be culturally in China: go local, native, or keep Western identity? This is a very important question, I think, and it's not easy to answer. I think in our, I would say that you should always have your own company value, brands, culture. You should always have it. And I would say that if you play to be a Chinese company, if you play against Chinese companies to be a Chinese company, you will lose because they are more Chinese than you, and then they know the system better than you. So don't try to compete to be Chinese, to compete with Chinese companies. But still, you have to think at least and act locally. I can share you this example of a European SME, actually very small SME from Denmark, that not Sweden, well, anyway, one northern country that actually is successful now in China. So this company, they were interested in the Chinese market. What they did, they had a solution, very useful solution, which is needed. It was needed in China. So what they did, it was in the 13 5-year plan. So in 2016, they analyzed all the local 5-year plans, not just the national 5-year plans for environmental remediation, but they went to analyze all the province level five-year plans within that sector to identify in which regions the problem was more prominent. The problem that the company wanted to solve was more prominent. So they had a short list of 3 companies. Then they hired a Chinese guy who was a former former government affairs person in China, because I think it costs a lot. But they hired this guy, and basically they used this guy to approach the local governments there in these 3 regions, and then eventually they started to work on a demonstration project with one of these provinces, and actually the project went well, and now the small SME is working with the Sinopec, with all the big state-owned countries. So they really acted like locally. So they went to see all the plans. They hired a local person. They hired a local. They contact the local administration. Of course, they do they do in the Chinese way. Long-term, gradual kind of engagement. It's not just I knock your door. Hey, do you want this? Yes or no? It's a very Chinese way of operating. So I would say you have to keep your foreign, let's say, some foreign traits, but still think locally. Have very light procedure to approval procedure or operating procedure, which in China are much lighter than in Europe. In Europe, you have a lot of approval, internal approval, decisions, discussions, meetings. I think these things are maybe things that are not helpful in China. If there are many other questions which were unanswered, maybe we can try to send a response by email if in the next days. Fortunately, time is up, but or still reach out to us.
Yeah, definitely. To this end, please, especially for those that have not registered an email address, please do reach out to us, because otherwise it would be impossible for us to reply to your questions. So before moving towards the end of the event, I would like to leave the floor to Gwenn.
Thank you, Davide. It's just 1 minute. Thank you very much, Alessio, for your very good speech. I would like to invite you all to our in-person web seminar on Get Ready for China. It's behind Davide, it's clear. And our speaker will be Mr. Alessio Petino, who will give you a better understanding in the Chinese market, followed also by 3 testimonials on how they entered the Chinese market. So I warmly welcome you on 11 May to the city of Bruges, Belgium, to our seminar. Sorry, we're used to saying webinar, have to get back to seminar. So you can also ask your questions live in person to Alessio in Bruges on 11 May. Thank you. I give you back the floor to Davide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gwenn. Yes, indeed. We hope to see you all there next month. And before officially ending today's webinar, I would like to once again thank you all for taking part, for your engagement in today's event. It has been great to see so many questions. Unfortunately, as mentioned, we have not been able to reply to all of them, but we will do our best to get back to you in the coming days. Before leaving you, I would like to ask you to please fill out the survey that you will receive at the end of the event on the Zoom platform. This really helps us to understand how we can improve and what content we can provide in order to be more helpful in the future for you SMEs. So thank you very much once again for taking part today. Thank you very much to EU China Business Association, to Gwenn. Thank you very much, Alessio, for your presentation. It has been a pleasure, and hopefully we will have the chance to interact in the future in person or online once again. Thank you, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.